I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rebecca Harris, and I am 68 years old. 6 months ago, I buried my husband Thomas after a sudden heart attack. We had been married for 45 years. Thomas was not a rich man, but he was steady, hard-working, and endlessly devoted. He left me very little in terms of material wealth, but he gave me something priceless, his diamond wedding ring. It was the ring he placed on my finger on our wedding day, the ring that symbolized every promise we kept through decades of marriage. That ring was the only treasure he left me, the one thing that kept me connected to him every single day. So when I realized the ring was gone, my heart sank. I turned to my daughter Ava, my only child, the one I had carried, raised, and sacrificed for. She stood in my kitchen, arms folded across her chest, her expression unnervingly calm. Her fiancé Benjamin Nelson stood just behind her, his tall frame filling the doorway, watching me with calculated indifference. "Where is your father's ring?" "Ava," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She exchanged a quick glance with Benjamin before answering. "We needed it for the wedding fund, Mom." The words hit me like a physical blow. My legs weakened beneath me, and I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. "You took your father's ring." I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Without asking me, Benjamin stepped forward, his voice smooth and practiced, the voice he used in the courtroom where he worked as a corporate attorney. "Rebecca, we saw an opportunity that made financial sense. That ring was just sitting in a drawer." "It wasn't just anything," I said, feeling something break inside me. "It was the last piece of your father I had." Ava sighed, checking her watch as if my grief was an inconvenience to her schedule. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Dad wouldn't want you clinging to the past. We need to think about the future. My future. My wedding. That's what matters now." The casual cruelty of her words cut deeper than any insult. Thomas had worked double shifts at the factory to buy that ring when we were just starting out. I remembered the way he held my hand, slipping it on my finger as he promised me forever. And now that promise was in the hands of a stranger, sold off without my knowledge, without my consent. "How could you?" I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. Ava rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Mom, you should be thanking me. That ring wasn't doing you any good just sitting in a drawer. At least now it's helping us start our life together." Yeah. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake sense into her. But instead, I stood there frozen, my hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the sink. The kitchen still smelled faintly of Thomas's favorite coffee blend. The memory of him felt alive in that room, and yet my daughter looked at me as if my grief were an inconvenience. That evening, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by decades of memories, the phone rang. I answered with a shaky voice, and on the other end was a man who introduced himself as Martin Goldstein, the jeweler from State Street. "Mrs. Harris." His voice was careful, almost apologetic. "You need to hear what we found inside the ring box." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The ring was gone, but the box, the small velvet box Thomas had always kept in the top drawer of his dresser, was not empty. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "When we examined the box, we discovered something hidden inside the lining." "Mister," Goldstein explained, "it seems intentional. I think you should come by the store as soon as possible." My mind raced with possibilities. Had Thomas left me a message, a final goodbye I hadn't discovered? "I'll be there first thing tomorrow." I promised. That night, I barely slept. The betrayal of my daughter had left a bitter taste in my mouth. But now there was something else, a mystery, a final thread connecting me to Thomas. Whatever he had hidden, he had meant for me to find it. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped into Goldstein Jewelers the next morning. The store was quiet, almost reverent, like a chapel where people came to exchange their most precious treasures. Behind the counter stood Martin Goldstein, a man in his 70s with silver hair combed neatly to one side. His face was lined with years of hearing stories that came attached to rings, necklaces, and watches. When he saw me, his expression softened into something like pity. "Mrs. Harris," he said gently, "your daughter sold us a diamond wedding ring earlier this week." The words made my chest tighten. I nodded, my throat too dry to respond. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "I wish I had better news, but the ring itself is gone. A collector came in early yesterday morning and paid cash. It left the shop before I even realized the story behind it." Dome. I gripped the edge of the glass counter, my knuckles white. Hearing it aloud felt like losing Thomas all over again. "But there is something you should know." "Mister," Goldstein said quickly. He bent down, rummaged beneath the counter, and pulled out a small manila envelope. "We found this inside the original ring box." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt strangely heavy, as if carrying more than just its weight. With careful hands, I opened the flap and slid out a folded piece of stationery. My breath caught the instant I saw the handwriting. It was Thomas's tidy, precise, the same script he used when balancing our checkbook or leaving me notes on the refrigerator. I unfolded it slowly, my vision blurring with tears. The message was short, only a few words written in his unmistakable hand. "Box 12, First National Bank. June 14th. I read it again, my mind stumbling over the details. "Safe deposit box number 12, First National Bank. June 14th. That date was not random. It was our wedding day. The day Thomas slipped the ring on my finger and promised me forever." "What does it mean?" I murmured aloud, though the question was more to Thomas than to Mr. Goldstein. The jeweler tilted his head. I couldn't say. "Mrs. Harris," but the way it was folded, hidden in the velvet, it was deliberate. "Whatever is in that box, your husband wanted you to find it." I pressed the paper to my chest. My heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. What could Thomas possibly have stored away in a bank vault all these years? Why had he never mentioned it to me? "Thank you," I said softly. "Mr." Goldstein's eyes lingered on me with sympathy. "Your husband must have loved you very much to leave behind a message like this." I swallowed hard, unable to speak. Love was too small a word for what Thomas had given me. Even from the grave, he was still guiding me, still protecting me from a world that had turned suddenly hostile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my bedroom window, the little note from Thomas lying on my nightstand, its few words echoing in my head. "Box 12, First National Bank, June 14th. I turned the paper over again and again, tracing his handwriting with my fingertip. It felt as though his hand was guiding mine. June 14th. I closed my eyes and was carried back to that humid summer day in 1978. I was a young bride, nervous but certain. The church smelled of lilies and candles. Thomas's hand trembled only slightly as he slipped the diamond ring onto my finger. His voice was quiet, but the conviction in his words was unshakable. "This is forever, Rebecca. This will always be my promise to you." The memory came so vividly that I could hear the music, feel the warmth of his hand, and see the hope in his eyes. I clutched the note to my chest. Thomas had tied the clue directly to our wedding date. That was no coincidence. He had always marked that day in ways only I noticed, writing it in the margins of calendars, scribbling it on receipts, jotting it in the corners of his ledgers. Even when we argued, even when life felt heavy, he found small ways to remind me of June 14th. Now I realized he had been leaving breadcrumbs all along, weaving our date into his paperwork, as though training me to see patterns others would ignore. The thought steadied me. I wasn't chasing shadows. I was following a map Thomas had drawn long before his death. The next morning, I found Ava in the kitchen pouring coffee. She looked at me with annoyance, as though I were an unwelcome guest in my own home. "I'm planning to visit First National Bank later today," I told her calmly. Her eyebrows shot up. "For what?" I placed the note on the counter, though I didn't hand it to her. "Your father left me something. A safe deposit box. I need to see what's inside." Ava's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Mom, you should be resting, not chasing after old scraps of paper. Dad's gone. You're only torturing yourself." I straightened my shoulders. "Your father wanted me to find this. I owe it to him and to myself to follow through." Her eyes narrowed. Mothers your age shouldn't be handling complicated things like that. You should let me take care of it. I could feel her probing, angling for control. No, I said firmly. This is between your father and me. Ava sighed theatrically, stirring sugar into her mug. Suit yourself. Just don't expect it to mean anything. Sometimes old men scribble nonsense. Her words stung, but I refused to let them shake me. Thomas had never scribbled nonsense. He had been meticulous, deliberate, precise. Everything he did had a reason. And the more Ava belittled me, the more certain I became that I had to uncover what lay behind that vault door. After she left for the day, I went upstairs and opened Thomas's old desk drawers. Inside, I found stacks of folders labeled in his neat handwriting tax returns, utility bills, bank ledgers. I flipped through page after page, and my breath caught when I noticed something peculiar. In the corner of several documents, insurance policies, receipts, even grocery lists, Thomas had written 6, 14, sometimes just the numbers, sometimes with our initials. At first, I thought it had been habit, a sentimental quirk, but now I saw it differently. He had been embedding our wedding date into everything, like a secret code. I sat back in the chair, the papers spread around me, my heart beating faster. This was no coincidence. Thomas had been building a system, a trail only I could follow. He trusted that I would notice because he knew me better than anyone else. The realization gave me strength. For weeks, I had felt like a victim, powerless against Ava's cruelty, isolated by her whispers that I was becoming forgetful. But in that moment, I knew better. Thomas had seen this storm coming. He had prepared me for it in his quiet, methodical way. I folded the note carefully, placed it in my wallet, and grabbed my purse. The decision was made. I would go to the bank that very day. Whatever secrets Thomas had kept hidden, I was ready to face them. The next morning, I stood inside the marble lobby of First National Bank. The note Thomas left clenched tightly in my hand. The polished floors reflected the light from the high windows, and the faint scent of floor wax mixed with the smell of paper and ink. My heart thudded as I approached the counter and handed the note to the young teller. I need access to safe deposit box number 12 inches, I said, my voice steady, though my palms were damp. The teller glanced at the paper, then looked at me. Do you have identification, ma'am? I slid my driver's license across the counter. She studied it, typed something into her computer, and after a moment nodded. Yes, Mrs. Harris. You're authorized on this box. Please follow me. My knees felt weak as she led me through a long hallway and down a flight of stairs into the vault. The thick door groaned open, revealing rows upon rows of small metal boxes, each containing secrets and legacies of countless families. She pointed to number 12. Take your time. I'll give you privacy. The heavy silence of the vault pressed against me as I slipped the key into the lock. My hands trembled, but the key turned smoothly. With a soft click, the door opened, and I pulled out the metal drawer. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the small private room the teller had provided and set it on the table. For a moment, I just stared at it, my breath coming shallow, my heart racing. What had Thomas hidden here, waiting for me to find? Finally. I lifted the lid. Inside was a neatly stacked folder and a small black USB drive resting on top. My fingers brushed the cool plastic, and I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I opened the folder first. The top document made my throat tighten. It was a life insurance policy. Thomas's life insurance policy listing me as the sole beneficiary. The coverage amount was clear, $2 million. My vision blurred with tears. Thomas had worked his whole life to provide for us, and even in death, he had left behind a safety net large enough to secure my future. I pressed the paper against my chest, sobs breaking free before I could stop them. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. Thomas had thought of me, planned for me, protected me, even when he knew his time might be short. For months, I had felt abandoned. But now I realized I had never been alone. When I regained my composure, I turned to the rest of the documents. What I saw next made my stomach twist. There were reports, transcripts, and photographs, all neatly labeled. The header on the first page read, Private Investigation Report. Subject, Ava Harris. My hands shook as I began to read. The report detailed gambling debts my daughter had racked up on online betting sites, tens of thousands of dollars, owed to people I had never heard of. Worse, it listed loans taken out under questionable circumstances, loans that Benjamin had co-signed. The further I read, the colder I became. The investigator wrote that Ava and Benjamin had been inquiring about inheritance laws. They had contacted attorneys to learn how to contest a will and even asked about the process for declaring a parent mentally incompetent. The words blurred as hot tears filled my eyes. My daughter, the child I had held against my chest. The girl I had stayed up nights nursing through fevers had been plotting to strip me of my dignity and my future. The report included transcripts of conversations between Ava and Benjamin. In one, she said plainly, Once Mom is out of the way, everything will be ours. We just have to push her into signing something. My hand flew to my mouth. I could hear her voice in my head, clear as day, dripping with greed. Beneath the transcripts were photographs. Ava meeting with a man outside a cafe. Benjamin exchanging an envelope with another stranger. Dates and times were carefully noted. Every page painted a picture of deception and betrayal. Finally, I turned to the last page. It was a letter written by Thomas in his familiar script, Rebecca. If you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I didn't want to burden you with suspicion while I was alive, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. Ava has changed. Her choices are dangerous. I asked a professional to investigate, and these are the findings. I know this will break your heart, but I couldn't let you face it without protection. Everything you need is here. Use it. Don't let anyone take from you what we built together. You are stronger than you know. Forever yours, Thomas. The words blurred as I clutched the letter, my sobs echoing in the small room. Thomas had known. He had suspected our daughter's intentions long before I did, and he had carried the burden of that knowledge silently, shielding me until he no longer could. I picked up the USB drive with trembling hands, sliding it into my purse. I didn't know what files it contained, but I was certain it held more evidence, more proof of what Thomas had discovered. My grief twisted into something new, a fierce determination. I closed the folder, slid everything back into the box, and carried it carefully out to the teller. My voice was steady when I said, I'm finished. Thank you. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, my tears drying on my cheeks. My daughter had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined, but my husband had armed me with the truth. Thank you, Thomas. I whispered into the quiet car. I will not waste what you've given me. I will not let them win. For the first time in months, my grief felt lighter. It had been replaced by something far more powerful, resolve. When I got home from the bank, I placed the folder on Thomas's old desk and sat staring at the small black USB drive. It looked so ordinary, yet I knew it could hold the answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. My hands shook as I slid it into my laptop. For a moment, the screen stayed blank, and I almost hoped it wouldn't work. But then a folder opened, and inside were dozens of audio files, each labeled with dates that stretched across the last year of Thomas's life. I clicked on the first one. The sound crackled. Then a voice I knew better than my own filled the room. It was Ava. Once Mom is in a facility, we'll have control. All we need is her signature on the power of attorney paperwork. After that, the house is as good as sold. Her words stabbed into me like ice. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. She sounded so casual, so confident, like she was discussing the weather, not her own mother's life. Then I heard Benjamin. His tone was smooth, almost rehearsed. Exactly. She doesn't need all that space anyway. The market is good. We could sell quickly and use the money to pay off the loans. No one would question it. I pressed a hand to my mouth. They weren't just thinking about it. They had a plan, a detailed, heartless plan. I clicked on another file. This one was recorded only weeks before Thomas died. Ava's voice again, sharper this time. Mom is stubborn, but she's getting older. If we keep telling people she's forgetful, eventually everyone will believe it. Once the story is out, it'll be easier to convince the court she can't handle her finances. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. It was true. The whispers from neighbors. The careful questions from friends, it all made sense now. Ava had been poisoning the well, crafting a narrative that I was losing my mind, and I had been too trusting to see it. The next recording nearly broke me. Ava laughed lightly and said, "Dad always kept files on everything. I bet he's got some account or policy hidden away. Once we find it, we'll be set. Mom won't even know what hit her." Thomas had known. He must have heard these conversations himself. That was why he'd acted, why he'd hidden the evidence, why he had written the note in the ring box. He had been protecting me even while I was blind to what was happening under my own roof. Tears spilled down my face. But alongside the sorrow, something else rose. Strength. It was faint at first, like the flicker of a match in the dark. But with every word I heard, it grew brighter. My grief had left me vulnerable, but Thomas had left me tools. He had known I would need proof. I played one more file, Ava again, this time her voice cold. "She's fragile. If she resists, we can always push harder. Stress her out. Make her doubt herself. The sooner she signs, the better." The sound of Benjamin laughing in agreement made my stomach turn. My daughter, the same girl whose hand Thomas once guided as she learned to write her name. The girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had kissed away, was plotting to strip me of my independence and dignity. I leaned back in the chair, covering my face with both hands. The recordings played on, one after another, each more devastating than the last. They spoke about selling the house, dividing the proceeds, even discussing how they would redecorate once I was out of the picture. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it, I felt a steady pulse of defiance. They thought I was weak. They thought age had made me helpless, but they were wrong. I closed the folder and removed the USB drive, clutching it in my hand like a weapon. This was more than betrayal. It was evidence direct, undeniable, recorded in their own voices. For months I had been drifting, lost in grief, but now I saw clearly. Thomas had left me this arsenal of truth, and I would not waste it. I stood slowly, wiping my tears. The ache in my chest was still there, but it had transformed. It was no longer only sorrow. It was resolve. Ava and Benjamin had underestimated me. They saw only a grieving widow, isolated and vulnerable. But what they didn't see was the woman Thomas had loved and trusted, the woman who had stood by his side through decades of hardship. I whispered into the empty room, "You thought you could silence me, Ava, but your father's voice is louder than yours, and through him, I will find mine again." 2 weeks after discovering Thomas's secret evidence, the phone rang again. I recognized the number of Goldstein Jewelers immediately. Mrs. Harris, Martin Goldstein's voice came through clear and warm. "Something remarkable has happened. I think you should come to the store as soon as possible." My heart raced. "What is it, Mr. Goldstein?" "The gentleman who purchased your husband's ring came back yesterday," he explained. "He said it wasn't truly his to keep. He asked me to return it to you with a rather curious explanation." "What explanation?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He claimed your husband had entrusted him years ago. He said Thomas gave specific instructions if anything ever happened." Within the hour, I was standing in the jewelry shop again. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and Mr. Goldstein emerged from the back, carrying a small velvet box. His face was solemn, but there was something almost reverent in the way he held it. "Here," he said, sliding it across the counter. "He told me to keep this safe until the day it found its way back to you." I reached out with shaking fingers and lifted the lid. There it was, Thomas's diamond ring gleaming under the lights. The same ring he had slipped on my finger nearly half a century ago. My breath caught, tears filling my eyes. It felt as though a piece of him had returned to me, as if the years between then and now had collapsed into this single fragile moment. I whispered his name, Thomas, and slipped the ring onto my finger. The weight was familiar, grounding, like coming home. But then I noticed something. The box was heavier than I remembered. When I turned it over, I felt the faintest ridge along the back, a line that hadn't been there before. My heart raced. I pressed gently, and the velvet lining shifted beneath my touch. A hidden compartment. My fingers trembled as I pried it open. Inside, tucked into a narrow slit, was a tiny micro SD card. My breath caught in my throat. The USB Thomas had left me had already revealed his investigation, his fears, his proof. But this was something else entirely. I looked up at Mr. Goldstein, my voice shaking. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head. "No. The gentleman who returned the ring didn't mention it. He simply said Thomas trusted him. Beyond that, I can't say." Clutching the box and the card, I hurried home, my mind racing. What more could Thomas have left me? Hadn't he already shown me enough? But deep down, I knew Thomas. He was never careless. If there was another secret, it was because he wanted me to find it, because it mattered. At home, I slid the card into my laptop. For a moment, the screen stayed blank, and I thought perhaps time had erased its contents. Then a folder appeared. My hands hovered over the mouse as I clicked it open. Dozens of files, audio recordings, video clips, scanned documents. I clicked on the first video. The screen flickered, and Thomas's face appeared. He was sitting at his office desk, looking older, thinner, as though the weight of what he carried had pressed heavily on him. "Rebecca," he began, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened. I didn't want to burden you with suspicion while I was alive, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. Ava has changed. Her choices are dangerous. I asked a professional to investigate, and these are the findings. But what I left in the bank vault was only part of the story. This card contains everything else. Every conversation I recorded in this house. Every meeting Ava had with lawyers. Every attempt she made to question your competency. I built this archive so that if she ever tried to take what is yours, you would have proof strong enough to silence every lie." I covered my mouth with my hand as the tears fell. Thomas's gaze through the screen was direct, almost urgent. "I'm sorry," he continued, "that our daughter became someone we no longer recognize. I hoped until the end that she would change. But hope cannot protect you. Evidence can. Use this, Rebecca. Protect yourself. Protect what we built." The video ended, and I sat in stunned silence. My body shook, not just from grief, but from the sheer magnitude of what Thomas had left me. He hadn't only protected me. He had outmaneuvered Ava and Benjamin at every turn. He had anticipated their cruelty, their manipulation, and created a shield that no whisper, no rumor, no lawyer could pierce. I clicked another file. It was audio. Ava's voice, sharp and calculating. I checked with another attorney. Once she's declared incompetent, it's done. We'll move fast, sell the house, settle the debts. She won't even know until it's over. The sound of Benjamin agreeing made bile rise in my throat. But instead of breaking me, it steeled me. This was undeniable proof. More than gossip, more than suspicion. It was their own voices plotting my downfall. The next file showed Benjamin sitting in our living room with a stranger, a man in an expensive suit who was explaining legal procedures in a low voice. "The courts tend to side with family members," the man said, "especially if there's documentation of cognitive decline. Have you started gathering witnesses, neighbors, friends, anyone who's seen her confusion?" Benjamin nodded. "Ava's been laying that groundwork for months. Everyone in the neighborhood thinks Rebecca's losing it." My chest tightened with anger and betrayal. They had been so thorough, so calculating, and all this time, I had been grieving, vulnerable, completely unaware of the trap closing around me. But Thomas had been watching, silent, vigilant, gathering evidence even as his health failed. And now that evidence was in my hands. I sat back, the ring gleaming on my finger, the micro SD card still loaded with its arsenal of truth. For the first time, I felt the scales tip entirely in my favor. Ava thought she had isolated me, painted me as frail, convinced the world I was slipping away. But Thomas had given me everything I needed to turn the tide. "You planned every step, didn't you? Thomas," I whispered into the quiet. "You knew the day would come." The grief in my chest burned, but alongside it grew something fierce and unshakable. Strength, resolve, love transformed into armor. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the lights of my quiet street, I turned the ring on my finger and felt Thomas's presence as though he were beside me. He had not left me alone. He had left me prepared. 2 days after I listened to the recordings, I was sitting at Thomas's desk, reviewing the investigator's notes again, when the doorbell rang. The sharp chimes startled me, breaking the stillness of the house. Through the window, I saw 2 strangers on my porch. One was a young woman in a navy suit carrying a leather briefcase, her posture stiff with professional confidence. Beside her stood a man in his 30s with a tablet tucked under his arm. I opened the door cautiously. The woman smiled, polished and rehearsed. "Mrs. Harris, I'm Claire Bennett, an attorney with Wells & Carter Associates. This is my associate, Daniel." The man gave a polite nod. Claire's voice softened as though she were speaking to a child. "We're here on behalf of your daughter, Ava. She's concerned about your well-being. She thought it might be helpful if we spoke about some legal options to make your life easier." A chill swept over me, but I stepped aside and allowed them in. My kitchen had always been a place of warmth, but now it felt invaded. Claire placed her briefcase on the table and opened it with a click. She slid a stack of papers toward me. "These documents," she explained smoothly, "would grant Ava power of attorney. It's only temporary. Of course, just until you feel ready to manage things on your own again. She would handle your financial decisions, pay bills, make sure nothing falls through the cracks. It's really just a safety net." Her tone was kind, almost soothing, but the words carried the same sharp edge I had heard in Ava's recordings. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap. "So, Ava believes I cannot handle my own affairs." Claire hesitated. "She's simply worried. She mentioned you've been under a lot of stress since your husband passed. It's normal for people your age to find financial matters overwhelming." None. The words stung, but instead of reacting, I leaned back and studied her. I had learned something from Thomas. Silence could be powerful. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. Finally, I reached to the side of the table and pulled forward the folder Thomas had left me. I slid it open and laid several pages across the wood photographs of Ava with Benjamin, transcripts of conversations, and records of debts that stretched into 6 figures. Claire blinked, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. Daniel leaned closer, his eyes widening as he scanned the documents. "These," I said quietly, "are not the actions of a daughter worried about her mother's well-being. They are the actions of someone desperate for money, someone willing to manipulate the truth." Claire cleared her throat, regaining her composure. "Mrs. Harris, we can't speak to the validity of these papers." "You don't have to," I interrupted firmly, "because I know exactly what they mean. They mean that Ava and Benjamin are drowning in debt. They mean they have been planning to sell my home once they control my signature. They mean they have been whispering lies to my neighbors about my memory so the courts will believe I am incompetent." The room fell silent. The tick of the kitchen clock was the only sound. Claire's eyes flickered with unease. Daniel shifted back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, then placed them directly in front of her. "Tell my daughter this," I said evenly. "Her plan will not work. I am not signing anything. And if she continues, I have more than enough evidence to bring to the proper authorities." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Claire's confident expression had faltered into something brittle. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I understand you feel strongly. Mrs. Harris, perhaps we can revisit this later." "No," I cut in, my voice steady, stronger than I had felt in months. "There will be no later. This conversation is finished. I rose to my feet, and after a pause, they stood as well. Claire slipped the unsigned documents back into her briefcase, her fingers fumbling slightly with the clasp. Daniel avoided my gaze entirely. At the door, Claire turned back one last time, her tone clipped. "We'll let Ava know you declined, but please remember, she's only trying to help." I looked her square in the eye. Help doesn't look like this. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling from the adrenaline, but beneath the trembling was something steady satisfaction. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt I had turned the tide. Ava had sent her soldiers into my home, expecting me to crumble. Instead, I had met them with evidence she never knew I had. I walked back into the kitchen and gathered the folder into my arms. My tears came, but they were not only tears of grief, they were tears of vindication. Thomas had armed me well. The recordings, the reports, the documents, they were my shield. "You were right, Thomas," I whispered into the empty room. "I am stronger than I knew." For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to triumph, quiet, steady, and unshakable. The kind of revenge that doesn't shout, but simply stands tall, refusing to bend. The morning after the lawyers left my house, I decided to walk to the grocery store. I needed milk, but more than that, I needed to feel normal again. Carrying Thomas's folder under my arm wherever I went was a reminder that my life had become a battlefield. A simple errand felt like a return to ordinary life. Even if only for a moment, the sky was bright but cold, and the air carried the sharp bite of early spring. As I pushed the cart through the aisles, I noticed how quiet it felt. Usually, I would run into someone I knew, another widow from church, an old neighbor, or one of the women from my book club. But this time, the familiar faces glanced my way and then quickly looked elsewhere. I spotted Margaret Patterson, who had once been my closest friend in the neighborhood. We used to share recipes, sit on my porch with iced tea, and laugh until the sun went down. When she saw me by the produce section, she turned her cart sharply down another aisle without even a hello. My chest tightened. I caught up with her near the dairy case. "Margaret," I said softly. "It's me. Did I do something to upset you?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the floor. "Rebecca, it's not that. It's just, well, Ava mentioned you've been having trouble lately, forgetting things, repeating yourself. I didn't want to embarrass you." Her words cut deeper than any knife. "That's not true," I whispered, but she gave me a strange smile, the kind people wear when they're trying to be polite, then excused herself and hurried away. I stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, gripping the handle of my cart. It was happening. The whispers I had suspected were no longer just suspicion. Ava had been sowing lies about me carefully, strategically, until even my closest friends were questioning my mind. By the time I reached the checkout counter, I could feel the stares. The cashier, a young man I had known since he was a boy, spoke slowly to me, over-enunciating each word as though I were hard of hearing. When I handed him my card, his glance lingered just long enough to make me realize he had heard the rumors. 2. Carrying the bags out to my car, I felt the weight of isolation heavier than the groceries. My world, once filled with familiar smiles, had shrunk to suspicion and pity, and all of it was orchestrated by my own daughter. Back at home, I set the bags on the counter and sat down heavily in Thomas's chair. For a moment, I let the despair wash over me. Losing Thomas had already left me hollow, and now Ava was stripping away what little community I had left. She wanted me to be alone, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. But as I sat there, my eyes fell on Thomas's folder, the neat stacks of evidence and the USB drive resting on top. I reached out and touched the papers, and something steadied inside me. Thomas had known this would happen. He had known our daughter's greed would twist her into someone I barely recognized. That was why he had prepared. That was why he had left me proof no rumor could erase. I wiped my tears and straightened my back. "Thomas," I whispered, "you gave me everything I need. I will not be afraid anymore." I stood and carried the groceries into the pantry, each step firmer than the last. If Ava wanted me silenced, she would be disappointed. I would not crumble under her lies. I had the truth on my side, and the truth was stronger than gossip. Later that evening, I received a phone call from another woman at church. Her voice was careful, hesitant. "Rebecca, some of us are worried. Ava says you've been forgetting important details, even leaving the stove on. Is everything all right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Everything is fine," I said firmly. "My daughter is mistaken. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." When I hung up, I sat for a long time in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Yes, Ava had managed to isolate me from the people I loved. Yes, she had convinced others to doubt me. But she had underestimated one thing: I was no longer the woman who bent under every storm. I was the woman Thomas had trusted to carry on. The woman he had prepared with every careful note, every breadcrumb leading to the truth. I glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. June 14th was circled in Thomas's handwriting, bold and deliberate. It reminded me of his promise at the altar. "This is forever." His voice echoed in my memory, steady and strong. I rose from the chair with renewed determination. Ava could twist words, but she could not erase facts. She could spread rumors, but she could not undo the evidence Thomas had placed in my hands. "Thomas," I whispered again, "you left me everything, and I am no longer afraid." 2 evenings after my unsettling trip to the grocery store, I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. I peeked through the lace curtain and saw Ava's car pulling up, Benjamin behind the wheel. My chest tightened. They hadn't called ahead. Visits from them were never casual anymore. They always came with an agenda. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I steadied myself, inhaling deeply before opening the door. Ava stood there with her perfect smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Benjamin hovered just behind her, his expression taut, his shoulders stiff under his tailored jacket. "Hi, Mom," Ava chirped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd check on you." Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked quickly around the room, scanning the desk where Thomas's folder usually sat. I had moved it earlier, locking it safely away. Benjamin closed the door behind him and offered a nod that felt more like an inspection than a greeting. "Everything all right?" I asked calmly. Ava's smile widened. "Of course. We just wanted to see how you're holding up. You've been through so much." She brushed invisible dust off the back of a chair and sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. Benjamin stayed standing, leaning against the doorframe with his arms folded. I walked to the table and set down 2 cups of tea I had prepared in advance. My hands were steady, though my heart thumped against my ribs. I knew this visit wasn't about concern. It was about information. And this time, I intended to give them exactly what they wanted, just not in the way they expected. "I've been sorting through some of Thomas's things," I began, stirring my tea slowly. "I actually came across something interesting." Both their heads lifted slightly. Ava leaned forward. "What kind of something?" I kept my tone casual, as though it were nothing remarkable. "An old investment account. Nothing major, but still a surprise. Your father was always so meticulous." The air in the room shifted. Benjamin straightened, his eyes narrowing. Ava's smile faltered for the briefest second before returning, sharper now, edged with hunger. "An investment account," she repeated carefully. "Where what kind of account?" I shrugged, feigning indifference. "I'm not entirely sure yet. Some paperwork, some numbers. I'll have Thomas's old lawyer look into it. He'll know what to make of it." Spike. The mask slipped. Ava's eyes flashed, and Benjamin's jaw tightened. Their eagerness bled through no matter how they tried to hide it. Ava's fingers tapped nervously against her teacup. "Lawyers are expensive, Mom," she said quickly. "You shouldn't waste money on that. Benjamin is great with numbers. We could take a look for you." Benjamin nodded, his voice low and steady. "It would save you a lot of hassle. Just show us what you found, and we'll handle it. No need to complicate things." I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. "Thank you, but I'd prefer to do it properly." Thomas trusted his lawyer. So do I. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mom, You're making this harder than it has to be. If you found something, we should know about it. It could affect all of us." Her words stung, but I kept my face composed. "It affects me. Ava, it was left to me." The silence thickened. Benjamin shifted closer to the table, his tone tightening. "Why don't you tell us exactly what the paperwork said? Numbers, names, anything." I set down my teacup, meeting his gaze steadily. "It's in good hands. That's all you need to know." For the first time, Ava's composure cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and impatient. "You don't understand, Mom. We need this. We need it before the wedding. There are debts to settle." "Oh." She stopped suddenly, her eyes widening as if she had revealed too much. But it was too late. Her words hung in the air like smoke debts. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. The gambling, the loans, the financial chaos, it had all caught up with them. My discovery threatened to be their lifeline, and they would stop at nothing to seize it. I sat back slowly, my heart aching, but my voice steady. "So that's it. It isn't about helping me. It's about rescuing yourselves." Ava's face flushed red. "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is," I interrupted. "You just confirmed everything." Benjamin stepped in quickly, his voice smoother, trying to regain control. "Look, Mrs. Harris, we're all family here. Let's not make this harder. If Thomas left behind assets, shouldn't they benefit everyone? Isn't that what he would have wanted?" I turned my gaze to him, my voice cold. "Don't you dare tell me what Thomas would have wanted." The room fell silent. Ava opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting toward Benjamin for guidance. He gave her a slight nod, but his jaw was tight with frustration. I rose to my feet, gathering the cups from the table. "This conversation is over. I will let Thomas's lawyer handle everything." Ava's voice sharpened, trembling with desperation. "Mom, please, if you care about me at all, you'll let us help. We're in trouble. And this could fix everything." Her words twisted inside me. I remembered the child who once clung to my leg on her first day of school, the teenager who cried over heartbreak, the young woman I had supported through every misstep. But now, standing in my kitchen, she was someone else entirely, someone who saw me not as her mother, but as an obstacle. "I care about you," I said softly, "but I will not be used." Her eyes filled with angry tears. Benjamin muttered something under his breath and pulled her toward the door. "Let's go." At the threshold, Ava turned back, her face hardened. "You'll regret this, Mom." The door slammed, leaving me in the quiet hum of the house. My hands shook as I placed the cups in the sink. The ache in my chest was almost unbearable, but beneath it pulsed something stronger resolve. Thomas had known. He had prepared me, and now I finally understood why. It was a gray morning when I called Thomas Chen, the private investigator Thomas had hired. His card was tucked neatly into the back of the folder my husband had left me. "Mrs. Harris," he answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. "Yes, I'm Thomas Harris's widow. He worked with you before he passed." There was a pause, then warm recognition. "Mrs. Harris, yes. Thomas told me you might call one day. Do you have the materials he left you?" "I do," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "All of it. Bring them to my office," he replied. "And Rebecca, what you're holding isn't just sentimental. It's protection." The following morning, I sat across from him in a sleek office downtown. His dark suit was neat, his eyes sharp but kind. I handed him the envelope containing the USB drive, the micro SD card, and the printed documents. My heart pounded as he began reviewing the files. He clicked through the recordings methodically, his jaw tightening with each new revelation. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim but certain. "Mrs. Harris, this is more than enough. These recordings are admissible. They're time-stamped. Clearly identify both Ava and Benjamin and establish intent to defraud you. No judge will question your competency with evidence like this. In fact, it could open the door for criminal charges, conspiracy, financial fraud, even elder abuse." My breath caught. Hearing it said aloud made the weight of it real. So she can't take me to court and claim I'm incompetent. He shook his head firmly. Not with this. This is a shield, Rebecca. A fortress. Thomas must have known exactly what he was doing when he built this case. He didn't just protect your finances. He protected your dignity. I pressed a hand to my chest, tears welling in my eyes. For months, I had felt stripped of everything: my husband, my daughter's love, even my reputation among neighbors. But here, in these files, was proof that I was not weak, not delusional, not alone. Mr. Chen slid the envelope back across the desk. Keep these copies safe. I'll prepare duplicates and submit them to my legal contacts. If Ava or Benjamin try anything, we'll shut it down before it begins. I nodded, gripping the envelope as though it were life itself. Thomas always said I was stronger than I knew. He was right, wasn't he? A faint smile tugged at his lips. He knew you'd need reminding. That's why he left this for you. Walking back to my car, the city noise hummed around me. But inside, I felt a strange calm. The fear that had followed me for months began to loosen its grip. Ava could spread rumors. She could isolate me. She could even send lawyers to my door. But she could not erase Thomas's truth. As I started the engine, I glanced down at the ring now gleaming on my finger. Beneath its weight, I felt the presence of both love and justice. Thomas had fought for me, even in silence, and now I would carry that fight forward. For the first time in a long time, I believed I could win. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of scent that clings to places where decisions shape lives. I walked through the heavy double doors with my head held high. Thomas's folder of evidence tucked securely in my arms. My knees trembled beneath my dress, but I kept moving. Each step echoed against the marble floor like a quiet declaration. I am not afraid. Inside the courtroom, Ava sat at the petitioner's table, Benjamin by her side. Her lawyer, the same young woman who had visited my home, shuffled papers with forced confidence. Ava wore a black dress, her hair styled neatly, as if presenting herself as the grieving, dutiful daughter. When her eyes met mine across the room, she gave a tight, rehearsed smile. The judge entered, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back into a bun. We rose, then sat again at her signal. The clerk announced the case. Ava Harris petitions for guardianship of her mother, Rebecca Harris, citing mental incompetency. My breath caught, but I steadied myself. This was the moment Thomas had prepared me for. Ava's lawyer stood, her voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, my client only wants what is best for her mother. Mrs. Harris has been showing signs of confusion, memory lapses, and difficulty managing her finances since her husband's passing. We believe granting Ava power of attorney is the only way to ensure her safety and stability. She sat down with a flourish, as if the matter were already decided. Ava nodded solemnly, casting a sympathetic glance toward me. It might have fooled strangers, but not me. The judge turned her gaze to me. Mrs. Harris, do you wish to respond? I rose slowly, unfolding Thomas's folder on the table before me. My hands were steady now, guided by something larger than fear. Yes, Your Honor, I wish to present evidence. The judge gestured for me to proceed. I began with the investigator's reports, neatly typed pages documenting Ava's debts, Benjamin's loans, and their inquiries about contesting wills. I handed copies to the bailiff, who delivered them to the bench. The judge scanned them with furrowed brows. Ava shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper, but I continued. Next, I said, my voice stronger, I have audio recordings collected by my late husband. These capture conversations between Ava and Benjamin, discussing plans to declare me incompetent, sell my home, and use the proceeds to settle gambling debts. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as I played a short clip. Ava's voice filled the air, clear and undeniable. Once Mom is in a facility, we'll have control. All we need is her signature. Benjamin's voice followed, calm and cold. Exactly. We'll sell quickly and pay off the loans before the wedding. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ava's face drained of color. Benjamin stared at the table, jaw clenched. Their lawyer fumbled with her notes, her composure slipping. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, these are not the words of children concerned for their mother's well-being. These are the words of people plotting to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my independence. The turning point. The judge raised an eyebrow, her expression grave. Do you have more Mrs. Harris? Yes, I said firmly. Video recordings. I presented the files Thomas had left on the micro SD card. One showed Ava in my kitchen, laughing as she said, "She doesn't even notice half the time. By the time she realizes, the papers will be signed." Benjamin's laughter followed, echoing through the silent courtroom. The judge's gavel tapped once. That's enough. The room was still. All eyes turned to Ava, whose face was pale and rigid. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. Miss Harris, the judge said coldly, this evidence is damning. Not only does it fail to prove your mother's incompetency, it strongly suggests fraud, manipulation, and intent to exploit her. This court will not be granting your petition. In fact, I am ordering these materials referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation. The words fell like a gavel strike, final and unshakable. Ava's mouth opened, but no words came out. Benjamin's shoulders slumped. His mask of confidence shattered. Their lawyer stammered about misunderstandings, but the judge's gaze silenced her. I sat quietly, my heart pounding, but outwardly calm. This was not a victory of shouting or anger. This was justice served through patience, preparation, and Thomas's foresight. The judge looked at me directly. Mrs. Harris, you are clearly competent and capable of managing your affairs. This court commends you for your composure and the thoroughness of your presentation. Tears filled my eyes, but I held my head high. Thank you, Your Honor. When the session ended, I gathered my folder and slipped Thomas's ring into my palm. I walked past Ava without a word. She looked at me with a mixture of rage and shame, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, warming my face. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. Not because Ava had been defeated, but because I had proven to myself and to the world that I was not powerless. Thomas's quiet revenge had become mine, too. We had won, not with fury, but with truth. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I whispered, "We did it, Thomas. We did it together." The weeks following the court hearing felt like breathing after a storm. For the first time in months, I woke up without dread weighing on my chest. News traveled quickly in our small community. Ava and Benjamin were under investigation for financial fraud. Their creditors, once hidden in shadows, now circled them openly. Every knock at their door was no longer an opportunity but a reckoning. I should have felt only bitterness, but instead I felt release. Thomas had always taught me that vengeance is hollow unless it transforms into something greater. He had left me not just protection, but possibility. The insurance policy $2 million meant for my security sat like a quiet blessing in my account. I knew I could live comfortably for the rest of my years, but comfort alone wasn't enough. One morning, as I sipped tea by the window, I realized what Thomas would have wanted. He believed in education, in lifting others out of hardship. That was why he worked extra shifts when Ava was young, why he saved pennies even when we had little. My hands trembled slightly as I called the local university foundation. By the end of the week, the paperwork was signed the Thomas and Rebecca Harris Scholarship Fund, dedicated to helping first-generation college students who, like us once, had dreams bigger than their bank accounts. The day of the dedication ceremony arrived. I wore a navy dress Thomas had always loved, with the pearl brooch he gave me on our 30th anniversary. Standing beside the engraved plaque, I felt his presence, steady and reassuring. The brass letters gleamed, Thomas and Rebecca Harris Scholarship Fund, because every dream deserves a chance. Tears stung my eyes as I whispered, "Thomas, you always thought ahead for me, and now I choose to turn your love into a legacy." Life began to settle into new rhythms. I returned to church luncheons, book club meetings, and neighborhood gatherings. At first, people were cautious, but then apologies came, hesitant yet heartfelt. Margaret Patterson took my hand one afternoon outside the library. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I believed what Ava said about your memory. I should have trusted you." I squeezed her hand gently. "We all want to believe the best of our children. I don't hold it against you." Her eyes filled with relief, and I felt the bridge between us begin to mend. Slowly, the isolation Ava had built around me dissolved, replaced by a community that was willing to see the truth. But the most unexpected moment came one quiet evening. The doorbell rang just as I was preparing dinner. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there clutching her purse nervously. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her eyes were Ava's, but softer, filled with hesitation rather than calculation. "Grandma," she whispered. It was Jessica, Ava's daughter from her first marriage. I hadn't seen her in years, not since Ava had pulled away and cut off contact. I stepped aside quickly. "Jessica, come in, sweetheart." She sat at the kitchen table, twisting her hands. "I know what Mom did. Everyone's talking about it. I didn't want you to think I'm like her." My chest tightened with both sorrow and joy. "Oh, honey, I never thought that." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I missed you. I wanted to come before, but Mom told me you didn't want to see me. She said you were confused." The lies cut anew, but I forced myself to focus on the present. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Jessica, I never stopped wanting to see you. Not for a single day." She broke into sobs, and I pulled her into my arms. For the first time in so long, my house echoed with the sound of family. Not betrayal, but reconciliation. That night, after Jessica left, with promises to visit weekly, I sat in the living room with Thomas's ring resting on my finger. I studied its sparkle, the tiny hidden compartments that had once carried secrets now revealed. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a torch I was meant to carry forward. As the sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting golden light across the scholarship plaque on the wall, I whispered, "Thomas, you worried about leaving me defenseless, but you left me stronger than ever, and I will spend the rest of my days turning that strength into something good." 3 months after the court hearing, I received a phone call from Chicago General Hospital. The nurse's voice was professional, but gentle. "Mrs. Harris, I'm calling because you're listed as the emergency contact for Ava Harris. She's been admitted to our care." My heart stuttered. "What happened? Is she all right?" "She's stable," the nurse assured me. "But she was brought in with severe anxiety and exhaustion. The doctors are concerned about her mental health. She asked specifically if we could contact you." I gripped the phone tighter. "She asked for me." "Yes, ma'am. She's been asking for you since she arrived." I sat down slowly, trying to process this unexpected turn. After everything Ava had done, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, she was now asking for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had spread rumors about my mental health, and now her own was in question. But beneath my initial shock, another emotion surfaced: concern. Despite everything, she was still my daughter. "I'll be there," I told the nurse. "Tell her I'm coming." The drive to the hospital gave me time to think. I had won our battle, but victory felt hollow knowing Ava was suffering. Thomas had protected me, prepared me, armed me with truth. But he had never told me what to do after the fight was over. This was my decision alone. The hospital corridor stretched before me, antiseptic and bright. Room 412. I paused outside the door, gathering my courage, then knocked softly before entering. Ava lay in the bed, her face pale, her hair limp against the pillow. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Mom," she whispered. "You came." I moved to the chair beside her bed, sitting down carefully. "Of course I came." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The beeping of monitors filled the silence. "Benjamin left," she finally said, her voice breaking. "After the court case, after the creditors started calling, He just left. Said he couldn't handle the mess anymore. I nodded, unsurprised. I'm sorry. She shook her head, tears tracking down her cheeks. Don't be. You were right about him. About everything. The debts, the gambling. It was all his idea at first. But then I got caught up in it too. And then we needed money. More and more. And her words trailed off. She looked down at her hands, thin and trembling on the white sheets. Why did you ask for me, Ava? I asked softly. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. Because you're the only one who ever really loved me. Not what I could give them. Not what I could do for them. Just me. A sob escaped her. And I threw it away. I was willing to destroy you to save myself. The raw honesty in her voice pierced my heart. This was not the calculating woman who had plotted against me. This was my daughter, broken and lost. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued, wiping at her tears. I don't deserve it, but I needed to tell you I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, and I wrapped both of mine around it. Ava, I said carefully, what you did hurt me deeply. Not just the ring, not just the lies, but the betrayal of trust. That's not something that can be fixed with an apology. She nodded, fresh tears spilling. But, I continued, if you're truly sorry, if you're willing to make amends, then perhaps we can find a way forward. Not immediately, not easily, but possibly. Hope flickered in her eyes. I'll do anything, Mom, anything. It starts with honesty, I said firmly. Complete honesty about the gambling, about Benjamin, about everything. Then therapy, real help for your problems. And finally, time. It will take time to rebuild what was broken. She squeezed my hand. I understand. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of possibilities between us. I didn't know if we could ever fully heal what had been broken, but for the first time, I believed we might try. As I left the hospital that evening, I thought about Thomas. He had prepared me for battle, but perhaps he had also prepared me for this, the harder work of reconciliation. The diamond ring on my finger caught the light, sending prisms dancing across the hospital walls. Maybe this, too, was part of his plan, not just justice, but the chance for healing. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. 6 months after Ava's hospital stay, I stood in the university auditorium, watching the first recipients of the Thomas and Rebecca Harris Scholarship accept their awards. 5 young people with bright eyes and determined faces, each with a story of hardship overcome. Beside me stood Jessica, now a regular presence in my life, her hand occasionally squeezing mine with pride. And next to her, somewhat tentative but present, was Ava. The road to rebuilding our relationship had not been easy. There were therapy sessions, both individual and together. There were difficult conversations about the past and cautious plans for the future. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but there were also small victories. Ava had found a job at a local bookstore. She had started attending Gamblers Anonymous. She had, with painful honesty, faced the consequences of her actions, including a court-mandated financial restitution plan. She wasn't the same daughter I had raised, and I wasn't the same mother she had tried to manipulate. We were both changed by what had happened between us. But perhaps that change, painful as it was, had been necessary. As the ceremony concluded and we walked together toward the reception, Ava paused, touching the scholarship plaque on the wall. "Dad would be proud," she said softly, "of this, of you." I smiled, feeling Thomas's presence as I always did in such moments. He would be proud of you too, for finding your way back. That evening, as we shared dinner at my house, a tentative family gathering with Jessica telling stories about college, and Ava quietly contributing, I excused myself briefly and went to Thomas's study. I opened the drawer where I kept his most precious things, the folder of evidence. Now closed and put away, the USB drive and micro SD card. Their secrets exposed, but their purpose served. And the diamond ring, gleaming as it had on our wedding day. I picked up the ring, turning it in the light. What had once been a weapon in our family's quiet war had transformed into something else, a symbol of truth's enduring power, of love that protects even beyond death, of the possibility of healing even after the deepest betrayal. I slipped it onto my finger and returned to the dining room, where my daughter and granddaughter sat together, their laughter tentative but real. Thomas had given me the tools to fight for justice, but he had also given me something more valuable, the chance to reclaim not just my dignity, but my family. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I felt a sense of completion. The diamond caught the light, sending rainbow reflections across the faces I loved. "Thank you, Thomas," I whispered in my heart, "for everything." If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below